The pen Weston Crane handed her wasn't the kind you bought at a drugstore. It was heavy, black lacquer, the kind of pen that made signing things feel like a ceremony. 14 people sat watching from around the conference table, attorneys, board members, his executive team, and not one of them would look directly at Veda. She looked directly at all of them. Weston set the contract in front of her without comment, the way you'd drop a form on a clerk's desk. He didn't sit. He didn't introduce her. He stood at the head of the table in a suit that probably cost more than her cafe's monthly rent, and he said to the room, not to her, "This is the condition my grandfather saw fit to attach to his estate. We're fulfilling it." We. As if Veda were a box he was checking. She read every page of the contract, all 11 of them. No one spoke while she did it. She heard someone shift in their chair somewhere around page 4. Someone else cleared their throat at page 7. By page 9, the silence in the room had that particular weight to it, the weight of people who expected her to hurry. She didn't hurry. She signed. She kept her copy, folded it once, and tucked it into the front pocket of her canvas tote bag next to a grocery list and a permission slip for Ginger's field trip. "Thank you," she said, to no one in particular. Then she looked at Weston directly. "I need to leave by 3. My daughter gets out of school at 3:15, and the carpool situation on Elm Street is a nightmare if you're even 5 minutes late." The room was very quiet. Weston looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. Not contempt exactly, something closer to the blankness of a man who had prepared for one kind of conversation and found himself in a completely different one. "My assistant will arrange transportation," he said. "I have a car," Veda said. "I just wanted you to know about 3 o'clock. She left. She did not look back to see who was watching her go. She'd known his grandfather, Robert Crane, the way you know someone who shows up in your life quietly and consistently for years without ever explaining exactly why. He'd come into her cafe every Thursday morning for almost 4 years. Black coffee, 1 blueberry scone, always sat at the small corner table near the window, where the light came in sideways in winter. He tipped generously. He asked about Ginger by name. He never once mentioned that he was the founder of one of the largest private equity firms in the country. She found that out after he died, when a lawyer named Pelham called her at 8 in the morning and read her a clause from a will she hadn't known existed. Robert Crane's estate, the company, the assets, the controlling shares, would pass to his grandson Weston, provided Weston married a woman the will specifically named within 60 days of Robert's death. The woman it named was Veda. Her first thought, there's a mistake. Her second thought, Ginger's going to be late for school if I don't hang up in the next 4 minutes. Her third thought, the one that settled in slow like cold water finding level, was about her father. Emmett Ossie had spent 11 years as the CFO of Crane Capital. He'd built the financial infrastructure of that company from the ground up. He'd been fired 7 months before he died of what the death certificate called cardiac arrest. He was 51 years old and had never, in Veda's memory, had a single health problem serious enough to keep him home from work. She'd kept his files, 3 boxes, stacked in the back of her apartment storage unit behind the cafe. She'd never known exactly why she kept them. She told herself it was because she couldn't stand to throw away his handwriting. She hadn't mentioned the files to anyone, not even Pelham. The house Weston put her in was the word house doing a lot of heavy lifting. It was a stone and glass structure set back from a tree-lined street in a neighborhood where nobody left their garbage cans out past Tuesday morning. Ginger called it the Castle and spent her first 48 hours there cataloging every room with the focused energy of a 6-year-old who has decided this is a personal archaeology project. Veda unpacked 3 boxes of her own things, kitchen tools, Ginger's books, her father's files. She set the files on the desk in the second bedroom and left them there for a week. Then one night, after Ginger was asleep and the house was quiet, with the particular silence of rooms that hadn't had children in them, for a long time, she opened the first box. Her father's handwriting was small and precise. He'd kept notes on everything, Meeting summaries, discrepancy logs, questions he couldn't resolve. The kind of notes a man keeps when he's starting to realize something is wrong, but doesn't yet know how wrong. She started with the most recent files and worked backward. She was still there at 2 in the morning when the light clicked on in the hallway. Weston appeared in the doorway in a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a glass of water in one hand, clearly on his way back from somewhere else. He looked at the files spread across the desk and then at her. "Those are your father's," he said, not a question. "Yes." "Why are they here?" She hadn't decided how much to tell him. She hadn't decided how much she trusted him, which, for the record, was approximately none. "Because I'm reading them," she said. He looked at the volume of papers, the careful organization, the yellow legal pad she'd already started filling. "What are you finding?" he asked. She met his eyes. "I'll tell you when I have something useful to tell you." He looked at her for another second, not angry, not quite, and then he left. She heard his footsteps on the stairs. A door closed somewhere above her. She went back to work. Her father's files, once all 3 boxes were open and organized by date, told a story that made her stomach go quiet in the way she recognized from childhood. The way it went quiet when something was true that she didn't want to be true. Her father had found a problem. Starting 3 years before his firing, a pattern of financial transfers moved through a subsidiary structure that shouldn't have had that volume of activity. Small enough in any given month to go unnoticed, cumulative enough over 3 years to constitute a number with 7 figures. He'd identified the routing structure. He'd flagged 2 internal accounts that didn't match any legitimate project code. He'd written in the margin, "Verify with RC before escalating externally." RC, Robert Crane. She didn't know if he'd verified it. She knew he'd been fired 3 months after that note. She knew he was dead 4 months after that. She pulled out a fresh legal pad and began writing. She found Weston in his home office 10 days after arriving. She knocked once and pushed the door open without waiting, because she'd learned that waiting for him to invite her in was a way of never getting anywhere. He was on a call. He held up one finger. She sat down across from his desk. When he ended the call, he looked at her with the expression of a man who'd started expecting her and wasn't sure how he felt about that. "I need access to the company's subsidiary financial records," she said. "Specifically, anything touching a subsidiary called Hallmark Capital Partners for the last 4 years." He was still. "Why?" "Because my father found something in those accounts before he was fired, and I need to know if it's still there." A pause, long enough that she heard a car pass on the street outside. "You think his firing was connected to what he found," Weston said. "I think it's a strong possibility." He looked at her with the focused kind of expression, the one where something behind his eyes was moving fast, even though his face stayed still. "Who else knows you're looking at this?" he said. "No one. I work after Ginger goes to sleep." He opened his laptop and typed something. "I'm giving you full access to the internal archive." She stood to leave. "Veda." She turned back. "Tell me first," he said, "before anyone else, whatever you find." She didn't say yes, and she didn't say no. She went back to work. It was a name she recognized that broke the whole thing open. 11 days into the archive, at 11 at night, with a cold cup of decaf at her elbow, and Ginger asleep down the hall, a wire transfer. October 14th. Originating in a Hallmark sub-account, routed through 2 intermediate accounts, arriving at a private holding company called Meridian Blue LLC. She knew that name. Not from the archive, from her father's files. He'd written it in the margin of a routing document from 3.5 years ago, circled it twice, and written beside it, "Cannot locate this entity in any of RC's established structures. New or not ours?" She searched Meridian Blue LLC through every corner of the archive. It wasn't in any project file. It wasn't registered as a vendor or consultant. It existed only as a destination, and it had been receiving money in varying amounts for 37 months. She pulled the most recent transfer, looked at the internal authorization. The name on it was Landon Crane. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she reached for her legal pad and began writing in her father's handwriting, small and precise, laying out exactly what she knew and exactly what she still needed. She told Weston at 7 the next morning before Ginger woke up. She put the legal pad on the kitchen table and sat across from him. He was on his second cup of coffee. He hadn't said good morning, but he'd pushed a mug toward her when she came in, which she'd come to recognize as his version of it. Landon has been moving money through Hallmark Capital Partners for at least 3 years, she said. The destination is Meridian Blue LLC. I can't find it in any legitimate company structure. The total transferred over the documented period is significant. Weston was reading. He picked up the pad. How significant, he said. She told him the number. He set it down very carefully. My father found the beginning of this, she said. He flagged Meridian Blue in his notes 3.5 years ago. He was fired 3 months later. She paused. He died 4 months after that. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a bird was doing something energetic in the backyard. The coffee pot finished its last cycle with a soft click. Weston looked at the table, not at her. At the table, the way you look at something when you're deciding how much of what you're feeling you're allowed to show. He was already 37 months in when your father noticed, he said. Yes. Your father documented it and went to. He stopped. Do you know if he reached my grandfather? His notes say he intended to. There's nothing after that. Weston pushed back from the table and stood. He walked to the window. She let him. Landon has had oversight of the Hallmark accounts for 4 years, he said quietly. He asked for it personally. Told my grandfather the subsidiary was underperforming and needed closer family attention. A pause. My grandfather agreed. And then started keeping very detailed personal records, Veda said, separate from the main system, which is what I've been working from. She folded her hands on the table. I don't think that was a coincidence. Weston turned around. Something had shifted in his face, something rawer than anything she'd seen on him. He knew, he said. I think he suspected. I think he found your father's original flag, and he started watching. And then he structured his will to give you a reason to look at the books before you started making decisions. She held his gaze. Because he knew you wouldn't look at them yourself. The truth of that landed without any cushioning. He was quiet for a long time. Show me everything, he said. That was when things changed. Not dramatically, not with any announcement. Weston started coming to her in the evenings, to the second bedroom she'd converted into a workspace, asking questions, sometimes just sitting at the far end of the desk with his own laptop while she worked. Ginger had taken to calling him the tall man, and then, gradually, just Weston, the way small children say names they're still deciding about. He was good with her. That was what Veda hadn't expected. He didn't perform it, didn't crouch down and speak in bright voices. He just talked to Ginger like a person, answered her questions seriously, let her be loud in a house that clearly hadn't had enough loudness in it for years. Veda noticed this the way she noticed practical things. She did not decide what it meant. The problem with Vesper came in week 4. Vesper Calland had been in Weston's life for 2 years. She was the kind of beautiful that required a lot of maintenance and broadcast the effort deliberately, because the effort was part of the point. Veda had seen her twice before, once in a news photo, once at a company dinner, where Vesper had smiled at her across the room with warmth that didn't reach anything north of her cheekbones. The problem arrived when Veda opened the Meridian Blue LLC registration documents that Weston had finally pulled from the Luxembourg filing authority. The beneficial owner was not Landon Crane. The beneficial owner was Vesper Calland. Veda sat with that for 11 minutes. She knew because she looked at the clock when she found it and again when she was ready to move. Then she went to find Weston. She closed his office door, set the document on his desk, and said, "She's the principal, not Landon, or not only Landon." He went still in the particular way she'd learned meant very fast, thinking happening underneath a very still surface. They built it together, he said. The LLC registration predates Landon's hallmark access by 6 months. She set up the receiving structure before he had authorization to fill it. Veda sat down. This wasn't him using her. This was a partnership from the beginning. He looked at the document for a long time. She's been in my house for 2 years, he said. Flat, no question mark, a man reading a fact he was still learning to hold. She knew your communication structure, Veda said carefully. Which accounts, which systems, who reports to whom. Everything she needed, she learned from you. From your grandfather's dinner table. She paused. And 2 weeks ago, when I noticed she'd been in this office, she was looking for what you had. I moved the critical documents to a locked case the week after I arrived, Veda said. I assumed from the beginning that this space wasn't secure. Weston looked at her, the particular expression she'd never quite been able to catalog. Too many things in it at once. You prepared for this before you knew what this was, he said. I prepared for the possibility. They're different things. Bertram Osei, no relation to her father, just a coincidence of names she'd clocked the first time she read his file and said nothing about. Met her at a diner 8 blocks from the company's main office. He was a compact, careful man with reading glasses on a chain and the patient expression of someone who had filed a great many difficult things and was still waiting to do something useful with them. He ordered black coffee and looked at her across the table without offering anything yet. You have your father's eyes, he said. I knew Emmett. She hadn't been prepared for that. She took a breath. Then you know why I'm here. I know part of it. He wrapped his hands around his mug. Emmett came to me in the last month before he was fired. He'd found the hallmark irregularities, and he wasn't sure who was safe to tell. We talked twice. A pause. I told him to go to Robert directly. I believe he did. And then he was fired. And then he was fired. Bertram looked at the table. I've been sitting with that for 3.5 years. Veda looked at him steadily. I need the authorization log from Landon's cabinet. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set a folded sheaf of papers on the table between them. I made copies, he said, 14 months ago, when I understood what the pattern meant. He looked at her. I was waiting for the right moment, or the right person. She picked up the papers. Her hands were completely steady. You should know, Bertram said, that Landon suspects you're looking. He said something to his assistant last week that came back to me through channels I won't detail. He is not going to wait for the board meeting if he believes the presentation is a threat. How much time do we have? Days, maybe less. Veda put the papers in her bag. She finished her coffee. She looked at this man who had known her father and carried it for 3.5 years. Come to the board meeting, she said. I'll need you there to confirm the log verbally. He nodded once. I'll be there. The board meeting was called under an emergency continuity provision, requiring only 3 senior shareholder signatures. Weston got 2. Bertram provided the 3rd. Landon arrived to find the session already opened and fully seated. Veda knew, from Bertram's description afterward, that it had stopped him for exactly 2 seconds before he composed himself and walked to his chair. He was that kind of man, the kind who could compose himself in 2 seconds. She'd planned for that. She sat beside Weston at the front of the room. She'd worn a gray blazer and her reading glasses, the ones she didn't actually need. The last time, she'd decided. The last time for the version of herself that made other people comfortable by looking smaller than she was. Weston addressed the room first. 12 minutes of clean, steady, unadorned fact. Not angry. The voice of a man who had discovered his house needed serious structural repair and had brought in a specialist to document the full scope. He said the company's founder had begun this inquiry before his death. He said the work was now complete. He said the board was the appropriate body to hear it. He sat down. Veda stood up. She walked the room through it in sequence. The hallmark subsidiary pattern, the Meridian Blue LLC structure, the authorization log, the beneficial ownership registration with Vesper Callan's name. The copies Bertram had preserved before the digital archive was scrubbed. She passed physical documents around the table. She answered the CFO's 3 questions and the lead independent director's 2. She held the room's attention not by performing anything, but by knowing every number, every date, every routing code from memory, because she'd spent 4 years missing her father, and the only useful thing she'd found to do with that was understand exactly what he had seen. When she sat down, the room was quiet. Landon said, "These documents require independent verification before any action." "The Luxembourg registration is public record," Veda said, without turning to look at him. "Any director can verify it through their own counsel in under an hour." She looked at the table. "I'd suggest freezing the Meridian Blue accounts before this session concludes." 3 board members were already on their phones. Landon pushed back from the table. He stood. His composure was extraordinary. She'd give him that even now. He looked at Weston. Then he looked at Veda. "Your father thought he could bring down what we built too," he said. Quietly, precisely, the kind of thing people say when they've stopped calculating what it will cost them. You see how that turned out. The room went completely still. Weston was on his feet before she fully registered the words. He moved around the table and put himself between Landon and Veda, and he said in a voice so quiet the room had to stop breathing to hear it, "Say that again." Landon looked at him, and for the first time since she'd entered that room, the composure cracked. Just a single fracture visible at the corner of his mouth. The face underneath, a man who had just understood that the calculation he'd been running for 4 years had finally produced the wrong answer. He didn't say it again. The vote took 4 minutes. 11-2 in favor of formal proceedings against Landon Crane and Vesper Calland, freezing all associated accounts, initiating a full independent forensic audit going back 5 years. The 2 opposing votes were directors Veda had identified before the meeting. She handed her notation to Weston in the car afterward without comment. He read it, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. "You had this prepared," he said. "I had most things prepared," she said. She found Vesper in the house that evening. Vesper was in the sitting room in a silk blouse, and she turned when Veda came in with the expression of someone who has spent hours building a particular emotional presentation and isn't certain it still fits. "I'd like to explain," she began. "You don't have to," Veda said. She sat down across from her, not close. Across, "I know what it was. And honestly," she looked at her, "I think you know how this ends." Vesper was quiet. "You're smarter than Landon," Veda said. "You've been running this longer than he has, and he doesn't know half of what you do, which is why you built it the way you did. Your name on the ownership, his name on the authorizations." She paused. "You were always planning to be the one who walked away clean." Something shifted behind Vesper's eyes. Not guilt exactly. More like the look of someone who had just been accurately seen for the first time in a long time and didn't know whether to be relieved or afraid. "The accounts are frozen," Veda said. "The proceedings are initiated. Weston is not pursuing you criminally if you leave before the forensic audit is complete." She held her gaze. "But I need you to understand something." Vesper waited. "My father died," Veda said. "He was 51 years old, and he had a daughter, and he found what you were building, and he tried to report it, and someone made sure he couldn't." She kept her voice steady. "I need to know who made that call." The room was very quiet. Vesper looked at her for a long moment. The construction was all the way down now. Just the real face, tired, precise, not entirely without something that might, given different circumstances, have been a conscience. "Landon made that call," she said. "Not me. I took the money. I built the structure. I knew what it meant for your father's career." A pause. "I didn't know it would go past that, for whatever that's worth." "It's worth something," Veda said. "Not much, but something." Vesper stood. She picked up her bag. At the door she stopped, her hand on the frame. "You're better at this than I am," she said, not bitterly. "The way you state a fact you finished contesting. Not because of the evidence, because you actually wanted the truth." She didn't look back. "I just wanted the money." She walked out. The front door closed. Veda sat in the empty room for a moment, and then she went to find Weston. He was in the kitchen. He'd made coffee, not for any particular reason, she thought, just because it was something to do with his hands while he waited. He pushed a mug toward her when she came in. She sat down. "Vesper is gone," she said. He nodded. He looked at his coffee. "She confirmed Landon made the call about my father." He was quiet for a while. Outside, the neighborhood was doing its ordinary evening things. A dog somewhere, a car slowing at the corner, ordinary life not caring what had happened today. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. She looked at him. "The contract signing," he said, "the way I handled it. I treated you like a condition being fulfilled instead of a person who deserved to be in the room as a person." She didn't minimize it. She didn't say it's okay or I understand. The reflex responses she'd spent years using to smooth things over. She looked at him and said, "Yeah, you did." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry, Veda." She held his gaze. Something in her chest, some tension she'd been carrying for 5 weeks without fully identifying it, loosened slightly. "Okay," she said. They sat with the coffee between them and the house quiet around them. 5 weeks of evidence, and late nights, and cold tea and slow reckoning, all of it present in the room without needing to be named. "What do you want to do with it?" Weston said. "The company, the way forward." It was the first time he'd asked her what she wanted, about anything that wasn't tactical. She thought about her father, 11 years of his work, and the notes he'd kept in the margins, and what it had cost him to believe that the truth was worth protecting. "A complete forensic audit," she said. "Independent, not internal. And the Hallmark subsidiary restructured with real oversight." She paused. "And a foundation. Genuinely separate, fully transparent, financial literacy programs. The kind of thing that helps people understand what the numbers in their lives actually mean." She looked at him. "The kind of thing my father would have built if he'd lived long enough." Weston looked at her for a long moment. "Let's build it," he said. From down the hall came the soft sound of small feet on hardwood. Ginger, awake past her bedtime, navigating by nightlight toward the kitchen, because she had an infallible internal clock for the hours her mother was still up and therefore available. She appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, squinting against the light, trailing the worn stuffed rabbit she'd named Howard for reasons she had explained once, and which had made no sense whatsoever. She looked at Weston. She looked at her mother. She looked at the coffee. "Can I have water?" she said. Weston stood up and got her water. He handed it to her the same way he handed everything, directly, without adjusting, not softened. And Ginger accepted it the same way and sat down at the kitchen table and started drinking it like she was planning to stay a while. Veda watched this and said nothing. Some things you don't put into words because the words would make them smaller. She thought about her father, keeping notes in the margins when no one was watching. She thought about Robert Crane at the corner table every Thursday morning, asking about a little girl he'd never met by name. She thought about her own handwriting on the legal pad, small and precise, like her father's, and all the long, quiet evenings that had led, one careful page at a time, to the right answer appearing at the right moment. She thought about Ginger saying Weston in the careful voice of someone still deciding, and then deciding. The kitchen was warm. The coffee was good. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into night, ordinary and indifferent, and entirely unaware that today, in a boardroom 11 miles away, the truth her father had written down in a margin 3.5 years ago had finally finished its work. Veda wrapped her hands around her mug and stayed exactly where she was.